This video contains both publicly available information and personal opinions. Generalizations about this information are made for the purposes of discussion, approximation, and expediency, and furthermore, should not be taken as an absolute representation of immutable fact, but rather as the spirit of the material, not the letter. All analysis, interpretations, and criticisms are my own personal views, and should not be taken as definitive statements of fact, or as definitive, provable intent on behalf of other parties. Viewer discretion is advised. The phrase, "this will kill Dead by Daylight," gets thrown around a lot, and to be fair, given recent events, it's not hard to see that there's probably some truth, considering there's been many flashpoint/watershed moments in this game's history that have genuinely threatened to kill this game. 9.2.0 PDB being the most recent example in memory. What if I told you that this game is already experiencing a controlled demolition as it is? It's no secret that every game that we love, even the most popular giants of this industry, are eventually going to die and will have to shut down their servers. But I think the difference in Dead by Daylight's death will be something that was genuinely preventable, at least in the beginning, but at this stage is now almost certainly inevitable. Take a look at these numbers throughout the near decade of this game's life cycle. Now, we can see kind of a slow trend upward. I guess that slow is relative. We do see some growth here pretty quickly, but it does seem to roughly or approximately stabilize around 30k to 35k in these areas here. I believe, if I'm not mistaken, that that's around Pyramid Head / Deathslinger time. Which is, at least in my opinion, where the game fully came into its own. I'll throw up the exact numbers here in post, and you can be the judge of that. But if you look throughout the game's life cycle, there are certainly spikes here and there, and then we're going to see dips again and again, right back to that kind of average homeostasis. And the truth is, these numbers, at least to me, do not reveal growth. They reveal a core, dedicated audience that peaked relatively early into this game's life cycle, with intermittent highs that are coming with the novelty of new DLC releases, only to fall back off into a sort of homeostasis each time. It begs the question that if this game keeps growing in killers, survivors, perks, mechanics, maps, why isn't the player base growing with it? This game is absolutely huge compared to its humble origins, and it pumps out DLC like crazy comparatively to other games within the industry. And this is the important question: what is the cost of that speed and constant addition of new mechanics? Now, from a purely technical standpoint here, by all accounts, Dead by Daylight is far from doing bad, at least on the surface level when we examine its average players over the years. I mean, DBD does have a very firm spot on the top 100s of Steam, and as of this making of this video, they currently sit at number 21 of Steam's most played video games right now. If we check Steam charts too, it looks pretty decent as well, with a large increase as of late, and that would, surface level, at least seem to indicate some growth. But if you apply pattern recognition to the whole, and just take a step back and look at the larger picture, in reality, this game, I just don't realistically see real growth here. I'd argue that in the beginning, we got our most growth, and it's so far just kind of plateaued around those early areas where we always seem to return to the wellspring of approximately to 35k average players. Now, of course, there are certain areas where we see huge upticks, but I would argue that it's just the illusion of growth. Like, these people are just coming in for events and license brand recognition around new killers or survivors that make them excited for a game they wouldn't normally play, and as soon as they boot up, they get absolutely fucking devoured by this player base who has a monolith of skills that they are just not equipped to handle, and it's like Saturn eating his son right out of the womb. They just stand no chance, and they realize that this game is fucking awful, and they don't want to play it. Correct me if I'm wrong, but otherwise, how do you explain that they're just not sticking around if the game is so good? If all you care about is direct monetary gain, I would have to imagine that this is actually a pretty effective strategy. After all, who cares if 20k new players jumped in only to bail a few months later, so long as you sold them an individual copy of Dead by Daylight, and presumably at least one new DLC on top of that. I have to imagine a few of those may have even bought cosmetics for whatever brand recognition brought them in. From a black versus red at the bottom of the paper equation, that seems to make green, and we all know green is good. But from a game health perspective, the effect of this, in my humble opinion, has been utterly disastrous. This strategy maintains relevancy and extracts capital by flaunting novelty without substance. Here's my question to you as the audience. Are you actually, happy with the state of the game as it is? Don't you ever suspect that maybe constantly adding new features every quarter might be a problem? And look, I know that something around that has changed, but it used to be that you would just experience a whole new DLC every 3 months. The schedule's intermittent, but I think we can all agree that this game just adds and adds and adds on a ruthless pace. To not put too fine a point on it, would you rather have the game as it is now with all its innumerable features and something like what? I don't know, I think there's roughly 40 killers in it or something at this point? Or would you rather have the game with only 20 killers in it, but every issue and bug you can think of is fixed, and the game functions perfectly? No bugs, exceptional balance, better map quality, the works. If you said the former over the latter, well, I hope you never expect the benefits of the former, because behavior has, at least to me, proven time and time again that they agree with you. It's better to just constantly push out new killers and new perks than it is to fix the underlying core disasters that have made this game a miserable experience to basically everybody. Maybe in the past, there was a labor of illusion that behavior could do both when the roster of killers was smaller, but you can't tell me now that with all the perks and killer powers in the game that this Gordian knot is ever going to be untangled. There's simply too much going on with every killer to put out every fire at this point and continually release new contents. And this is going to bring us to the core of my argument today, and that is debt. Debt is killing Dead by Daylight. There's the social debt of constantly burning and churning new players, old and new, while not squashing the toxic rampancy of your own player base, as well as just making this game virtually unplayable for newbie players, both survivor and killer, because it is so hostile and unfriendly to them. There's the technical debt of taking quick and easy routes, rather than coding properly with the hard work that would be required to fix real issues within the game. And last but not least, there's the bloat debt, where the sheer scale of the game at play, coupled with what is, in my opinion, the developer's incompetence, makes balanced design and bug removal just a losing battle. Now, I'm not going to get too far into social debt, because I think that's fairly self-explanatory, constantly burning bridges with bad PR, kind of the way they've treated aughts in the recent Walking Dead stream, their stance on bug fixes and game design, the fact that a lot of people just don't feel listened to by this company. I think you can use your imagination to figure out what I'm talking about when we're talking about social debt. I want to talk more specifically about the other two debts, so let's start with what is technical debt. Now, Wikipedia defines technical debt, also known as design debt or code debt, is a qualitative description of the cost to maintain a system that is attributable to choosing an expedient solution for its development. While an expedient solution can accelerate development in the short term, the resulting low quality may increase future costs if left unresolved. The term is often used in context of information technology and especially software development. Now pay attention to that last line, because in layman's terms, essentially cutting corners in your game development to all but basically vibe code will fuck you down the line. Anyone who has plugged in enough to the DBD scene at this point has probably heard the term spaghetti code and its infamous connection to behavior and how they do things. Now, when you're looking at a ball of string, you might imagine with thousands of elements in a game with almost something like approximately 300 perks on both sides of the field, that fixing issues might be hard. We're all familiar with these costs. New update and suddenly Slinger's Chain just bounces off nearly every target. Or now the Huntress's hatchet throw is just at a completely different angle. Killers can drop and trade weapons like Chainsaw Myers. You plug one hole and suddenly a ripple-out effect just begins to fuck over other systems you had no idea were even related in this cornucopia of pasta noodle gaming. But there's another cost to this too, and it goes way deeper than just the spaghetti code meme. Now, it is my understanding that when Behavior was developing Dead by Daylight, they did not go into this thinking, oh yeah, this is going to be huge, this is going to be the next big thing. From my recollection, it was more described as something of a side project. Given that kind of lack of faith or vision, they built the game kind of like shit. Now, don't get me wrong, for what it was early on in the game's development, I'm sure it was fine for the scale that they presumed that this game would operate at, but the game was not designed with the level of robustness required for its scale even just a few years down the line, let alone almost a decade later. Mint did a video referencing the problems I'm about to talk about and reference here in this video. You can look at his video right here, links in the description, where he describes these problems as unfixable and quote-unquote baked in. Now, I don't really like the phrase baked in because it implies a level of permanency or fatalism that is just nice enough and convenient enough for Pontius Pilate Behavior over here to wash their hands of responsibility for this mess that they call a video game, when in reality what we're talking about isn't baked in, it's presumptions. And these presumptions become load-bearing structures in code. Think of it like this. I make the blueprints for a single-story house, a very light attic, just big enough for a man to crawl around in with limited insulation, and I call it a day. However, down the line, I realize, I really want a second story, but my wiring is all wrong for it, the plumbing was never intended for that. But most of all, there's this one thing, this tiny thing that makes this a real bitch. Even if I can troublesomely overcome those other elements, it's this load-bearing structure, the presumption that I built this whole thing on to begin with. In DBD terms, that might be the y-axis, aka verticality in this game, or killer powers just being items, or 3 tiers for every perk. Now, altering this involves altering a load-bearing structure, and that's a lot of work. It is easier to just build a shitty second level, reinforcing the existing load-bearing structure with all the ass-backwards stupid-ass shit that entails to get your Frankenstein second level, than it would be to do the responsible and costly thing of just adjusting the load-bearing structure. Now, I'm sure you're starting to see where we're at now with DBD, and how every level increases the cost and painstaking time, not to mention what I presume is just risk, it would entail to fix the real underlying issues. It's not that it can't be done, but it takes time, risk, and money, and I think I know how Behavior feels about all of those things. Now, as you might imagine, a structure built in this way means every subsequent structure further up depends on that load-bearing beam further down, which exponentially increases the cost and risk associated with correcting it. This is why there will never be unique killer powers. It's not that it isn't possible, but that it's hard work and costly. And presenting those things to Behavior, well, you may as well just be presenting a vampire with a silver cross. There's also all the other shitty little intangibles that get hit by these load-bearing structures, these presumptions along the way. And we see them, I think, perfectly illustrated in a very simple thing, Franklin's Demise. Now, Franklin's Demise is a perk in this game that originally just knocked items out of survivors' hands and degraded them very slowly over time until eventually they hit 0 charges and evaporated, just like my trust for Behavior. However, with the introduction of, quote, limited items, aka items either tied to perks or a killer's power, like flashbangs, Sadako's tapes, the Lament configuration, the perk was nerfed as to only break down charges rather than destroy the item, because the game was built on the load-bearing presumption that no item was indispensable to either side and thus could be destroyed. So rather than fix that load-bearing structure, which likely is tied to at least every survivor add-on and item in the game, and possibly even killer's powers for all I know, it was deemed that Franklin's Demise was a worthy sacrifice so that we could all enjoy being tunneled to death by Nemesis and his pachinko machine RNGesus zombies. After all, you can't have a perk that depletes or destroys balancing items like syringes, let alone Pinhead's box, which is mandatory for survivors to interact with to stop chain hunts. Fast forward to the introduction of fog vials and the rework of several items like keys and maps, which introduces things like recharging/infinite items and the concept of individualized item uses, in addition to charges. And whoopsie, well, it looks like we've got another conflict in that old load-bearing structure down there, don't we? Our presumption was based on items working a specific way that is no longer now true. And now, well, Franklin's mysteriously gets nerfed again. And now all it can do is knock the item out of your hand. In a few years, I presume when we make even more changes to the way items work, Franklin's Demise will simply put a subtitle on your screen that declares Franklin is dead. And we'll just be done with this stupid fucking perk altogether. Now, if you scale up my example of Franklin's Demise and apply that logic to the game that I've just listed, I think you're going to see the game in a whole new light and begin to realize why things are the way they are. This debt, it has a cousin, or maybe more accurately, a brother. You see, it's no secret that DBD has been cranking out DLCs for this game on the non-stop slop train since the success of Michael Myers. Now, while things have somewhat changed recently with Survivors and Killers, I know they're being dropped separately or something. They've split them up to try and stagger the releases, so we're no longer doing the whole Killer and Survivors at the same time. It used to be, at least in my time when I was playing this game at its height, kind of on a quarterly deal, where one DLC would drop every quarter and would have one killer and at least one survivor. They each would have their own perks, and typically, but not always, there would be a new map in the mix, and that means that every 3 months there were 6 new perks, one entirely new power, and maybe even a new map on the field. Now that additional map must now work with every killer made before it, and every killer made after it. Now let's just focus in for a minute, just on the killer role for a second. Now on the surface, this isn't so bad in the beginning, when you have kind of a lower roster of killers. Making sure only 10 or maybe even 13 killers are able to work on these new maps isn't so hard to keep track of, nor is their powers. But with each new addition and each new map and each game-breaking bug that enters the game with the technical debt, and the harder and harder it is to keep up with fixing the problems that affect old killers. How long did it take Michael Myers to get attention and a rework? What about Clown? What about Ghostface? Pig? Have you ever just thought about how little behavior really cares about the old killers in general? For myself, my own killer is constantly affected by these elements, as Deathslinger gets hits with game-breaking bugs like the spear shot bouncing on survivors, to the maps themselves no longer working for shots, as invisible walls that were never there now exist for some reason, or areas you should be able to shoot through have just never been patched to allow me to, despite visually the fact that, by all accounts, I should be able to shoot through them. What about Pyramid Head on his treatment center, where his shots just will not pass through the windows because they're all at a different, level, I guess? What about Night in the ethereal plane being pallet stunned? Or Dealer's Choice of any twins bug? The fact is, there's just no time to worry about those killers, because the game is too big now to worry about every little detail with a roster this size. The only focus that matters is on the future and making sure things work for the next big thing to extract money out of brand recognition for new fans and players who are just going to be devoured by the player base before they realize that, hey, this game's not that fun. They just uninstall it forever. But so long as they're handing off money to behavior before it's done, who cares? Now snap back to reality. Remember, we're just talking about the killer element on this side. Consider there are now 6 new perks, and each time how drastically they're going to affect the game. Every interlocking synergy, both intended and unintended, over and over and over, year after year. For now, it's something like approximately 40 killers, and in the ballpark of about 300 perks. This is what is known as bloat debt. It isn't even about behavior's competency at this point, which, we could talk about that, but in reality, there's no world where any company could possibly balance a game with this much mechanical depth, then stacked on top of all of these mechanical elements that you just keep adding and adding and adding. Maybe at one time it was possible, but now it's just we'll get to fixing it someday, which for some killers reads as fucking never. And even then, it's completely hit or miss for whether the rework is going to be good or not. You gave us Dash Slop Myers. You broke Deathslinger's ADS arms. You gave Chainsaw Overheat to Billy. You've inadvertently nerfed Pig forever to the point where it's a meme. You couldn't possibly be later if you tried around realizing that Blight might be a little overtuned. Hell, the entire existence of Twins and Houndmaster up to this point, not even mentioning Skull Merchant's basic deletion from the game. She's completely irrelevant at this point. Etc., etc. It would take a prolific company the size of Blizzard to balance this game accordingly, and we're stuck with people who released the Walking Dead chapter and Meet Your Maker. It's absolutely fucked, and it's not going to stop. I don't believe these people care. because the slop must flow. We're locked into DLC for years, apparently, with license deals, and by God, you best believe they ain't gonna stop. Make no mistake, this is how they make their revenue. You jingle some keys in front of an audience, with more money than sense every few months and a constant rotating door of new killers and survivors before the novelty wears off, and they're relegated to the dustbin of histories, both the players and the DLC. This can't go on. The debt is constantly growing, and eventually it's going to become so unwieldy that it's going to collapse underneath its own weight. The game, in my opinion, is already over the hill. I would be shocked if Dead by Daylight was still going as strong as it currently is in, say, 3 years. There have been people who have already stated that the game is quote-unquote peaked with the release of the FNAF chapter, which I think is probably true. Can you even, imagine how fucked this game is going to be in, 5 years? 5 years. Honestly, ask yourself that question. Can you envision what this game is going to look like in 3 to 5 years? Do you honestly see it being better? With the constant addition of new mechanics, killers, items, the works. On top of the fact that you've got all these technical issues that are only going to get worse. Now, just for a moment, we're going to talk about one last thing, and that is the company themselves' behavior. And to be clear, everything that follows here is my own personal opinion. The company has done this to themselves. The myth of, oh, poor behavior, they're boxed in, and you just don't understand. Without these licenses, they'll die, and they can't do anything. These deals were made years ago. Well, whose fucking fault is that? Presuming that that's true, whose fucking fault is that? I'm really tired of hearing the excuses for this company. You really need to stop making excuses for behavior. There is no excuse, ultimately, for any of this. Flash back to when this game was getting made. Now, I understand that this company probably didn't know that you had a hit on your hands. Not a lot of companies do. I understand that they invested an appropriate amount into this game, both financially and into the code itself, but here's the thing. Dead by Daylight 2 is the only solution to all of these problems, to this debt. Yet we hear excuse after excuse as to why this either didn't happen or won't happen, and that's all they are. They're just excuses. Michael Myers was the turning point for this game. It was a watershed moment for their company. It was a proof of concept that this was going to be big. This was the moment to either fix the fucking game at its base or make a better built sequel altogether. Now, I already know what you're going to say. You're going to say, they didn't know how big it was going to be. You're telling me that they didn't understand what they had in their hands with Michael, with Bubba, with Freddy. They still didn't have a sight for the future or a vision. Well, whose fucking fault is that? Oh, they have to renegotiate licenses and people would be mad at losing their favorite killers, or maybe they'd have to rebuy them in the future. Well, that's just tough fucking shit, dude. Games get sequels, and other people playing other games don't go into sequels with direct expectations for all of their content to transfer over to the next game. What's more is, who's to say behavior wouldn't or couldn't at least meet people halfway, such as giving players all unlocked original characters in a future installment, or discounting it, or perhaps working with license holders to get discounts for people who already could prove that they own the DLC of their specific license elements in the past. You need to stop saying that they're going to lose licenses forever, as those deals could never be renegotiated, especially with a foot in the door for a sequel to begin with. This is such a stupid excuse. You can't possibly know that. And if DBD has taught me anything, a lot of the licenses they've acquired, at least early on, seem to have been pretty chill. Like Freddy, Bubba, Michael Myers, Pyramid Head. As far as I know, there's never been any problems with that, even considering the new games coming up. Likewise, again, even if it was true, the best time to make a sequel was early, around Michael Myers, or even as late as Freddy or Bubba, maybe even Pig, but not fucking now. Oh, they wouldn't have the money to do it again. Whose problem is it that they haven't been squirreling away money for a sequel? They certainly had the money to make and develop Death Garden. Now, a lot of you just turned your head like, what, Death Garden? What's a Death Garden? Well, I'm glad you asked. Yeah, it's an asymmetrical FPS that they tried to recapture the lightning in a bottle from Dead by Daylight 2 years later in 2018. And yeah, it flopped because this company can't replicate that success. Ever. They've been pouring money into other projects trying to do anything but make Dead by Daylight 2. Flop after flop. Isn't that fucking funny? For reference, I didn't even know Death Garden existed until about a month ago. And what's more, from the best of my knowledge, development started a year or so after DBD's initial release sometime in 2017 and released in 2018, around the time when the game, again to the best of my knowledge, only had about 4 licensed killers or something. Even if they burnt through their money making a shitty game, it still isn't an excuse. Doom was made by like 5 people. No Man's Sky development was faced with innumerable issues. Now, they've lost something in like a horrible flooding incident. They had to leverage their houses to produce a game that kind of failed on launch, and then they fucking worked through it and made it great years later. Look at Minecraft and how it's progressed from a passion project that has been retooled into an entirely different engine. It started in Java, and now it's on like a Bedrock system or something, some new engine. The reality is, there can be no great success without risk, and behavior, from all the information that I can see, is not willing to take those risks. Even if you whinge and minge saying, yeah, easy for you to say, you're talking about other people's money, and fair enough, but doesn't Kickstarter exist? Are you telling me behavior, if they came out earnestly and announced early on in the situation sometime in 2018, said, hey guys, look, we got some core flaws, unfortunately, at the base of this game, and it would be very expensive to fix. And I can tell that this is going to be big. So here's our promise. Dead by Daylight 2. Imagine it. 40 killers. Our commitment to gaining new licenses. You're telling me that the community at that time wouldn't have backed it? That you couldn't have figured out some way to raise any gaps in that money otherwise? I just don't believe that. Still not convinced? You don't think they haven't monetized the fuck out of Dead by Daylight to begin with? They sure have money for other projects. Where's it coming from? Where is it going? Where is the money going? Because I just don't feel like it's going back into this game. Look, there is no shortage of solutions any more than there is a shortage of excuses. The fact of the matter is, nobody is responsible for the state of Dead by Daylight but behavior themselves. It's their fault that they're not more successful. The honors of being a captain come with the responsibility of the weight of command. And ultimately, the only reason Dead by Daylight is stuck in this alleged heroin loop of license deals for profit on novelty is because of behavior themselves. They lack the balls to take risk, they lack the vision and faith to execute properly for the future, and in my opinion, they're too lazy and incompetent to fix or repair this game. Time's up. The game is what it is. There's just no fixing it now. Behavior has proven to me that they have neither the temperament nor the talent to correct things as they are now. I sincerely cannot imagine this game 5 years into the future, if by some miracle it's even still going by that time. How much worse can it get? At a certain point somewhere along the line, this debt is going to catch up, and this house of cards is going to come tumbling down. I imagine if I was a betting man, it'd be like a domino effect. There's going to be one big kickoff event that's going to bleed serious players, and over the course of a year, bit by bit, the player base is going to tumble off the cliff slowly behind. But my advice to killers or survivor mains watching this would be, you need to stop giving this company money. You need to financially boycott Dead by Daylight if you want change, because that is unfortunately the only thing these people understand. I'm not convinced that they have some grand love of this game or the community. They have not convinced me. The community, like these elements that you're going to cite, like, oh, what about community submitted skins and Bill Your Killer's background? All smoke and mirrors. It's bread and circuses bullshit to keep you entertained and not focused on, just like the D&C tactics that are constantly going on between survivors and killers, between old players and new players, between high ranks and low ranks. It's all to keep you distracted from addressing the elephant in the room, and that is that behavior profits off of your misery, brother. Anytime you think of shit like that and say, maybe I'm being unreasonable with this company, I just want you to think about Ots Darva in the Walking Dead stream. I want you to think about what happened to Ots specifically. And that was him. Now, what do you think that they think of you? Fuck them. Close your wallet or admit that you consent to the current state of Dead by Daylight. Dead by Daylight can't be saved. The social, technical, and bloat debt are killing this game, and it will kill it, make no mistake, eventually. You need to force this company's hand to shit or get off the pot and make Dead by Daylight 2 and do it right, and just fix all these issues at base. This has been Mad Moon, and just remember, you don't have to live like this.